Good evening again, everybody. I'm very excited for tonight's guest of Learning with My Rabbis. We have all the way from Los Angeles, Rabbi Erez Sherman from Sinai Temple. He was the assistant rabbi at the synagogue that I grew up at, and while I was working there as a rabbinical student, I got to know him very well. And I am so excited, Rabbi, to share you with my community here. So welcome.
Thanks. I remember some of those Shabbat dinners, just us two learning Torah and eating some good chicken in our apartment.
As we dive in, I always like to begin just asking everyone, what is it that brought you to the rabbinate?
You have a couple of years? Or I have to do this in 3 seconds? No.
The short version, somewhere in between.
Got it. The short version is it's family business. My dad, Rabbi Charles Sherman, now of Philadelphia, has been a rabbi in the conservative movement for close to 50 years. My sister is a rabbi, Rabbi Noga Marshall, in Congregation Bethel in Voorhees, New Jersey. And my wife, Rabbi Nicole Guzik, who works with me, or I work with her, at Sinai Temple right here in LA. But I actually had to convince myself that it wasn't a family business. When I went to JTS, the seminary in New York and Columbia, the List College joint program, I was pre-med for a couple of years up until my sophomore year. My sophomore year in college was 9/11, right before Rosh Hashanah. And it was that year that at Columbia University, you also take a music class, music humanities. Every student at Columbia takes that class, no matter if you're tone deaf or not, or can play an instrument or not, everybody. And on that year, the teacher said, write a paper on anything musical. So I am musical. I studied classical piano up until college, and jazz and Jewish music was my forte. I decided to write a paper comparing two different kol nidres, one a choral version and one a solo version. And the teacher came to me and afterwards said, why did you write something like this? And by the way, most of the people teaching that class are TAs. I happened to, by coincidence, get the head of the music department. Her name is Professor Deborah Bradley. And she said, why did you write this? And I said, well, I love Judaism. I love music, and it was easy for me. And she said, I need to tell you something. And she told me her story that she grew up Christian in Waco, Texas. And her parents, later she found out that she was adopted, and her birth parents, she found out, were Holocaust survivors. And she said, I have a Jewish neshama. I have a Jewish soul. And in fact, she taught a class called Jewish music. And that changed my life because it was right after 9/11. I love music, and I missed that aspect of my life. I loved the Jewish aspect. And I remember like 3 weeks later, I went home to Syracuse, New York, and there was a bat mitzvah at my dad's synagogue. And somebody messed up in terms of scheduling, and the wrong Torah reader, something happened. And I was able to quickly step in and just do it. And again, it was easy for me. But I realized that after the bat mitzvah family said, you saved our day. And I realized at that moment that just because something may come easy to you, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it. In fact, it's the exact opposite. It means that you should pursue that passion. So I went back after Thanksgiving weekend in 2001 to Columbia University. I stopped taking biology and organic chemistry. I majored in music. I wrote my thesis at the seminary in Jewish law and music within congregational life. And every single step on my rabbinic journey, as you know, from Shomrei Torah and now here at Sinai Temple, has had a very large musical component in it. And so that's how I'm sitting here today at Sinai Temple.
Wow. It's funny, you mentioned your thesis. I actually recently, thanks to COVID, had time to clean out all the boxes of junk that I brought. And one of the things I actually found was a copy when I used it as a reference in one of my papers in rabbinical school.
I'm glad that you called it junk. That's very nice.
Didn't mean that, but in the boxes of things I found the treasure that is music in Jewish life, responses to issues raised in social and religious contexts over the spectrum of denominations.
Wow.
And it really was incredible the amount of work in depth you did in researching the different approaches to music And yet it's funny when I have congregants who tell me that they went to this synagogue or that synagogue when they were traveling. So often I hear, I thought they were conservative, but they must be reformed. They had music. And I think that's not a defining mark. So what is it about music in Jewish law, and how does that all work? If you could, again, not the 2-year, but the shorter version that you could give us.
So I'm going to give you one story that has changed my philosophy on that based on doing that research. When I grew up in my dad's synagogue, God forbid at home, I actually played the piano on Shabbat, right? I never touched an instrument. In fact, the organist and choir, by the way, they weren't Jews who were in our synagogue, right? The organist was a fantastic organist. I used to sit back there and watch him play at hands and feet, but he wasn't Jewish because it was actually basically, right, the Goy Shel Shabbat. It was somebody who was not Jewish that would perform the labor on Shabbat for us. And then I got to New York, and I began experiencing all different types of synagogues. And the one that really impacted me was BJ, B'nai Jeshurun. If you haven't seen their live stream recently, especially during COVID, it's unbelievable on Shabbat, with Chazan Ari Privin and Rabbi Roli Madelon, Rabbi Felicia Sol. And that music totally impacted my life. And when I realized it was actually the clergy members who were involved in the music. And so I'm going to get to Rabbi Grover for a moment. He was the rabbinic intern for my father in Syracuse, New York. And the Friday night service there was basically non-existent. There was a minion of people, but that was it. And we said, let's do something called Shabbat in the Round. In fact, we took it from Sinai Temple. They were doing Torah in the Round, which we still have that service. And we took that, and we went to Syracuse, New York, and I played the music. Rabbi Grover told the jokes and did the Devar Torahs and the songs. As you know, Rabbi Grover actually loves to sing and has a beautiful voice. We went from 15 people on Friday nights to once every 8 weeks, 200 to 300 people were coming. It was unbelievable. And in fact, it was the first time I called my dad and I said, let me try something. Let's at least do Simchat Torah. Instead of just banging on the table saying, David, Melech Yisrael, let me bring a band. Let me bring the right sound system. Let's have the quality. Game changer. And when I realized that when I play the tefillot in my hands, it's not just notes on the page. And when I say I mean Jewish musicians. We are as much as shlichei tzibor and messengers of prayer as the people that are also leading the service. And that completely changed my frame of mind in that thesis, actually, as I began researching things around the country. And a huge model was also at Sinai Temple, Friday Night Live. Rabbi Wolpe often tells this story. When he started Friday Night Live over 25 years ago with Craig Taubman, a giant in the Jewish music industry. And Rabbi Wolpe's father, Rabbi Jared Wolpe of blessed memory, came to Sinai Temple. And Rabbi David Wolpe says he was so afraid when his parents saw this rock service, what they would say. And his mother elbowed his father and said, see, why couldn't you have done this? Right? And so it takes those moments of breaking to realize we can do this. And it's interesting that we're talking right now, in the month of Av, when we're sort of in mourning. Yes, as you can read that thesis, there are things about the destruction of the temple and why we don't use music. There are also many things over our generations and traditions that have been reintroduced to bring joy back into our lives. And for me, music has been one of them that's been a catapult to engagement.
It was really fascinating. I was in Hadar last year for a learning conference, and one of the shiurim was specifically about music. And we looked at a text that actually it seemed that even more forbidden, at least it's clearer than instruments being forbidden, that things like clapping and snapping and tapping and all of that are absolutely forbidden. And yet that's so commonplace. I don't think people really think about that at synagogue. I see it all the time, but music seems to, for some reason, in some people's minds, be that dividing line between halachic and non-halachic. For whatever reason, it's earned that place.
Right, and look, I want to just put it out there. It's a slippery slope, right? Well, if we do this, then won't we do this, right? And again, each community is very different, right? So when you talk conservative reform, yes, it is true. A lot of Reform synagogues and conservative synagogues might look very similar musically. I think the differences come in theologically, how we think about that. What is the kavanah behind it? What is the mabeh of the tefillah? What needs to be done and what does not need to be done? I think in this COVID time right now, right? High holiday services, if you're live streaming, if you're pre-recording, somebody can't sit in front of a computer for 5 hours. It's basically not possible, right? So what do you include? I know the Rabbinical Assembly put different guidelines out and things like that. And for music, I think it's a huge component right now. What will we look like musically over this high holidays that we're not taking away from what people expect, while also giving, I call it sacred entertainment, and I don't say that word lightly, just as I say another term that I don't think I coined it, I don't remember where I heard it, but musical midrash. My best example is the song, the Tefillah V'Shamru, on Shabbat evening to Paul Simon's Sound of Silence. As you go into the silent Amidah, V'Shamru V'nei Yisrael, right? Take the words of Paul Simon, that melody implanted onto our Tefillah. It's midrash, it's musical midrash. And I think if we're actually, the musical term is called contrafaction, when you take music from here and implant it on something that it's not usually on. And it's a beautiful thing that I think people can do, that people are beginning to do much more often.
Wow. I actually had on for one of these episodes the song leader from my childhood summer camp, J.C. Shalom. We had Robbo. We were talking about just music has this way of connecting and educating that I saw kids from all ages, from the littlest to the oldest, teens, who you can't get excited about anything, jumping up and down at song session and things like that. So in your experience using music as part of worship, as part of Jewish education, have you found the similar thing that it really it spans the age gaps, that it's a point of connection? Why does music work so well?
Right. So if I shared my screen and played Kol Nidre right now and you close your eyes, you would immediately be transplanted to, right, Shomrei Torah Synagogue as a youth hearing, the Chazan sing Kol Nidre. So sound and music has that transformative ability. Actually, I just finished last night teaching the Introduction to Judaism through AJU at the Sinai Temple course. And we had to go fully online. We met once in person, the rest of the 20 classes online. And what I realized I could do is how to teach Judaism in 20 weeks was through music. And every week for 2 hours, we would watch YouTube after YouTube. And that wasn't laziness on my part. Actually, it was hard work to find the correct YouTubes. But to teach somebody who is learning about Judaism for the first time, we talk about food and the taste of Judaism. We talk about the sights of Judaism. But I don't think we talk about enough the sounds of Judaism. And when you think about the sounds of Judaism, right now I'm hearing my grandfather's voice of blessed memory in my mind of him chanting Eicha, which we're going to be chanting shortly, right? And he would practice over and over again. But now as an adult, I hear his voice again. I hear the cantor of my youth. I hear the songs that I learned in New York. I hear the songs that I learned at Shomrei, right? Those moments, in fact, transcend us. And a beautiful teaching, I'm going to quote my colleague, Rabbi Sam Rotenberg, who works with me at Sinai Temple. Last year, he taught this on Rosh Hashanah, right before we blew the shofar. He said, look, we have a guitar here. We have a drums kit here. We have a flute. All of those, our ancestors, way back when, they never heard of, they never seen, they don't know what it sounds like. But in a moment, we're going to blow the shofar. And when you hear that shofar, that sound is the same exact sound that they heard at Mount Sinai, that they heard traveling through the desert, that they heard in the temple, that they heard in Babylonia, that they heard in Europe, that they heard in Argentina, that they heard in Toronto, and they hear in LA. Sound connects us as much as words do.
Wow. I think it's really great that it's part of your rabbinate you've been able to bring music, something that you're very passionate about. And I know something else that you're very passionate about is sports, particularly basketball. And you've also been able to bring that to your rabbinate too. Can you talk a little bit about that, the programs you've started and the things you've done with basketball and Judaism?
For sure. So one of my big mantras, if you wish, is you don't have to check your kippah by the door. When you walk into Sinai Temple, when you walk into Beth Tikvah, right? Often, and I'm speaking on the kids for a moment, but I really think adults as well, They think, okay, we're going to walk into the physical synagogue. We'll be Jewish. When we leave and we go outside, we can do whatever we want with our lives. But a message that I think Rabbi Wolpe really takes seriously is that what we do inside can match what we do outside, and what we do outside can inform how we live our Jewish lives. So basketball has always been a big thing in my life. Grew up in Syracuse, New York. We had no Raptors. We had no Lakers. We had the Syracuse Orange basketball team. Actually, one of your congregants, Dan Shulman, very well-known ESPN broadcaster. He's been to Syracuse many times broadcasting those games. And sports was religion. It really was a religion. Ask my dad, you cannot have a synagogue event on a night where the entire city would be at the stadium, right? And so sports was huge. I wasn't going to be a professional basketball player, but I was always wondering, first of all, if I ever took a year off from the rabbinate, I would want to be in sports business. And when I came to Sinai Temple specifically, we thankfully had a gym here, and they were empty in the summer. But I knew we have 1,800 family units, that all the kids were actually playing basketball very close by. So I said, okay, I'm going to reach out to high-level coaches. I'm going to put them in our gym. We're going to bring them back here, and they're not going to sacrifice anything. And it was amazing. We started with 25 kids. Last week, we sold out our weeks of camp at about 100 kids a week. This year, of course, we didn't have it. But it went well beyond basketball. In fact, that's what I call the program, Beyond Basketball. Every single day, we had a social action component. We did a homeless drive. I would bring special needs athletes, and the older campers would be trained in how to run a special needs clinic. And I would watch kids first afraid of the special needs kids coming in. And on Friday, you would say, what was the best part of the week? And they would say, training with these special needs athletes. I would bring in athletes who are not Jewish who played in Israel and tell us, what was your experience in Israel? And you would hear these former professional athletes saying, my mom told me never to go to that war-torn place, and I came back and I said it's the best place on earth, right? Last year we had Jaron Collins come, who's a coach with the Warriors. We had Karan Butler, who's a huge spokesperson right now in the NBA about racism and sports. We've had Courtney Lee, who played for the New York Knicks. Mike Sweetney, who was the number 8 pick in NBA draft in 2003, right behind LeBron James. He spent Shabbat with us, right? I can't ask for anything more of my rabbinate, that I allow kids to enjoy their love of sports in our building and not sacrificing at a high level. And last year, we started a travel team that did not have to play on Shabbat, but would play in a very competitive league. And it all got cut based on COVID, but when this thing turns back to normal, God willing, we're going to get that up and running. And the cry for that is so big, and I'm excited to continue that, because sports has given us a platform for Judaism, in fact. And you've seen, right? Steven Jackson, Deshaun Jackson, all these athletes who are saying tweets that hopefully they just don't know what they're talking about, that we can say, no, you can actually do this together. We can partner, where sports becomes a place where skin color doesn't matter, religion doesn't matter, but it can be done in a place of faith.
Wow. You've mentioned now a couple of times COVID, so maybe it's time to address that a little bit. How has that impacted things at the synagogue? And I imagine really in the same way it's impacted synagogues everywhere, but what have you guys been doing to try to keep that sense of community that you have at Sinai, despite being forced to be apart?
So I'll always remember March 12th when the doors closed, basically. And I remember we first said, oh, there's a lot of online minions out there. This will just last a couple of weeks. Let's outsource it, and we'll come back when we're ready. And 5 minutes later, we all ran back to the meeting room, and we said, no. Our own communities need to connect with our own clergy. So we started with a cell phone in my dining room, and Minion on Sunday morning was a YouTube channel. And that YouTube channel grew pretty quickly. So online went Minion, and online went Shabbat services, and online went this, and online went that. And now I think that, just as probably all the other rabbis you have spoken to, including yourself, and Rabbi Grover and I speak about this often, how can you make the virtual experience more relational and more in a connected way? So we're trying little things. So we do stream on Shabbat, and therefore we do use Facebook and YouTube at this time. So we say for Misha Berach, please write in the name, and we will now say that name out loud. I feel like I've entered the production business, but I don't think that's a bad thing. Because actually, go back to Shomrei Torah, our time there together, we started live streaming about 8 years ago at Shomrei Torah. And we were way ahead of the game. And before video stream, we first live streamed audio. Of course, Steve Bellenfant. I'll give a shout out to Steve Bellenfant. It was Steve who said, we can do this. So we put this little contraption, and the first Shabbat that we were going to do a live audio stream. We didn't expect a big audience. That Thursday morning, there was a bar mitzvah that Shabbat. Thursday morning, I got a call saying the mother of the bar mitzvah boy is in the hospital and will not be at her son's bar mitzvah. And it was devastating. And at the same time, I could say, sitting in your hospital room, you will hear and it was Parshat Va'etchanan, you will hear your son read from the Torah and the Ten Commandments. And the first recipient of the mother of the bar mitzvah of that Shabbat. We then went to video, and we were able to live stream. My parents weren't really able to get out to California a lot during my time at Shomrei Torah. But I can tell you, my mother stepped foot in that building twice, but I felt so connected to that building because we were able to connect with her. And often people over the last few years go, well, what's the real need of this? Well, guess what? There's a need now, and now many of us are behind the times. So we had to catch up with the times. In fact, just today, the delivery came of our new cameras, and we're not going back. We're only going forward. So we're excited to take that step now, even though perhaps it should have been taken many years ago.
It's interesting that, right, the reason you installed these or started at Shomrei Torah with this was so people that could not physically come could connect. We actually started that process this last year of working towards that, and then COVID struck in the middle of it. And now we all really fall into that category, a far majority of people that just can't make it. And that sense of connection is great. But again, it's been a struggle, like you said, of finding ways of making it personal, despite it being online.
So we have a global audience now also, which I know so many others do as well, right? I talked to a member whose parents are in Toronto, actually. But they're like, this is the first time that my parents are davening with me. Right? We're watching the same service. I didn't have to go home and call and say, what was the Rabbi Sherman about? I'm watching it at the same time as you are. So that's been an interesting, a nice blessing. And I know people say, somebody once explained to me, when the LA Dodgers went on TV, basically full time, nobody's going to go to the games. And what happened? More people went to the games because they saw what they could experience. So I do hope that one day when the doors open again, that people are going to want to go because they see what they can experience and hear and see.
Absolutely. I know a lot of people, when we first started talking about live streaming pre-COVID, were afraid that people are going to just want to sit home and watch it. But now that we've all been in that position, I think most people have recognized that it's not the same, right? It's something better than nothing. But if you're able to be in person, if you're able to see your friends, your family, your community, that's really what everybody wants.
It's not the same for us too. It's not right. It's not the same for us.
Yeah.
I mean, my wife, Rabbi Guzik, and I, we're in the chapel together, and it's like painful to be singing to a wall, right? And I know that people are tuning in and everything like that, but I mean, you probably know it too. Like, we cannot wait for that day when the sanctuary can be filled and will be filled.
Absolutely. I mean, we've been letting in on Saturday mornings, 25 people we've just moved up to. It's very spread out and very distant. And even then, it feels very weird giving a sermon and knowing that most of my audience is, not up in heaven, but up at the camera attached in the ceiling, that's where I should be looking. And those are the people that I'm talking to, but I can't see them. So
at least you can see the people that are falling asleep in your sermon, though. It's very important.
I told them that I want them to bring eye masks as well, so that way I don't
just
notice.
Checking.
I know interfaith work is another big part of your rabbinate. Could you speak a little bit to that, what you're doing and why? Why is that so important?
Yeah, that started a couple of years ago. Actually, I take that model from my dad. I wrote my high school or my college essay when I was a senior in high school. My dad had a very special relationship with Father Joseph Champlin, of blessed memory, of the Cathedral of downtown Syracuse, New York. He was very well known in the Catholic Church, Father Champlin, or Monsignor Champlin, writing books about marriage. And one time they did a pulpit swap. So I remember a Sunday we went to the cathedral. That Shabbat, Father Champlin spoke to our synagogue. In fact, we had a trip to Rome and Israel planned, but then when the second Intifada hit, then unfortunately it was canceled, and then Father Champlin got sick. So I always had this interesting urge to delve in that route. When I was at the seminary, JTS in New York, I lived at Goldsmith Hall, and right next to there was a Catholic church. I remember speaking there for Vespers, their liturgical Sunday service, also really, really interesting. And then when I got to LA, just the last couple of years, I was able to connect with a couple of different clergy. And I'll just tell you two of them specific that I have really nice relationships with. One is Pastor John Paul Foster of Faithful Central Bible Church. It's a mega church in Inglewood, California, an African-American community. And we bonded because I was connected by him through Bishop Robert Stearns of Eagle's Wings, who sends Christian pastors to Israel. They told me, you're in your 30s, he's in your 30s, you got a couple kids, he's got a couple kids, you've been to Israel, he's been to Israel, go have lunch. We had lunch. We realized very quickly that we grew up completely in different worlds. We served completely different communities, and we had the same passion for Israel. And out of that love of Israel together, we began being friends. So we've gone to UCLA basketball games together. But beyond that, every Martin Luther King weekend, we call it Unity Shabbat, he now comes. He brings his young professional choir. We have a Shabbos dinner with 30 of his congregants and 100 of our congregants. That's how it started. But take it to what happened over the last 8 weeks when the George Floyd riots happened. It's such an easy call. It was calling my friend, J.P. Foster. And he did he gave an amazing sermon that weekend. It was called Who's Your Neighbor? And he basically asked people to think about, who is your neighbor? Do you know your neighbor? And when he gave that sermon, I was proud to say that we knew each other. We know our neighbors. And then Sinai Temple, just 6 weeks ago, we have a gigantic banner on our building, on the exterior of the building, on Wilshire Boulevard, not a small street, as you know. And it says, we stand with our African-American brothers and sisters against racism. That's a huge statement to put in our neighborhood, basically Beverly Hills. And when we sent it to Pastor Foster, he was so moved and could not believe that we would do that. And now what's happening now, right, with some anti-Semitism from the Black community in the sports world. Now we're working on the next step. What does that look like? And I'm putting together a program where we take 10 families from Sinai Temple and 10 families from Faithful Central. And we don't talk about intellectual things. We talk about relational things. Who's your neighbor? And so we're about to start that. That's one end. On a different side, I have a neighbor, Father Ed Benioff of Church of Good Shepherd, Catholic Church, 1.5 miles away from our doors of Sinai Temple. Didn't know each other. That story happened after the Pittsburgh shooting of Tree of Life. One of his congregants knew somebody from our synagogue and said, will you come to our church? I said, I'll try. I just didn't make the time. And after the Tree of Life shooting, I got a call saying Father Ed would like to come to Sinai Temple. He came on a Shabbat morning. He gave a beautiful prayer. I said, I got to go there now. And so I went there. We also became friends. We also went to Dodgers games and Lakers games together, if you're getting the hint here. And they, in Beverly Hills, have over 100 homeless show up at their doorstep every Friday. So we have a Spoonful of Chesed program where we cook for our own congregants. We shifted that and we began cooking for the homeless twice a month. Right now, that shelter is not open because of COVID, and they have a website called Feed the Poor, and we're getting to volunteer with them in there. So he calls it the stuff that we do together, covenant work. And it's been really exciting being together in covenant work. As you know, sometimes clergy of different faiths have much more to talk about than people within our own faith, actually. So that's been a nice way into our community.
Wow. It's great that there's so many ways you found your rabbinate to be beyond just what we might think of as the traditional things a rabbi does, leading services, giving sermons, in terms of incorporating basketball and relationships with not just Jews, but your non-Jewish neighbors and the music and everything. It's been a very diverse rabbinate that you've led now. Going back a little bit, though, to rabbinical school, you mentioned earlier Rabbi Grover, and that he was the intern at your father's synagogue. And I don't know if most of our audience knows this, but you and Rabbi Grover are very, very close friends. You've been since rabbinical school. And despite Rabbi Grover explicitly forbidding me from asking, I was hoping maybe you could share with us a story or two of a younger Rabbi Grover and what he was like.
As you know, Rabbi Grover is very shy and very timid and very quiet, right? No, I'm just kidding. That would actually describe me. And to see this Rabbi Grover, very accomplished academically from Princeton, of course, walk into the seminary. I had already been there for undergrad. So this new guy walks in. To be honest, we weren't in the same sort of social circles the first couple of years. And then we needed both of us were looking for a roommate to live with in Israel. And it was sort of a shidduch that it worked out. And to be honest, he's become one of, if not my best friend. We've shared both chavruta aspects of learning together. We've shared joy. I was at his wedding. He was at my wedding. But also we've shared sorrow as well. I will always, always remember the vibrancy of his mother, Janice of blessed memory. He gets a lot of his spunk and his ruach from his mother. And I know that he sees a lot of his mother in his children as well. We vacation together, our families, and also him and you as well. You showed up on the foots of my doorstep in Philadelphia when my brother of blessed memory passed away a couple of years ago. He gets it. And when I say he gets it, he gets community, he gets Judaism. To be honest, he's not afraid to put himself out there and take a risk. And even though he knows that might be a risk for his own community, he also knows that it could be a benefit for his community and a larger Jewish community as well. I've seen it through his interfaith work. I've seen it through his sermons. I've seen it through his love of music. I've seen it through his humor. And to be honest, I think he's just a wonderful dugma, being a rabbi, husband, father, community member, friend. And actually, Rabbi Ed Feinstein once said this. He said this many times, but I heard it at the rabbinical assembly, my first one, and it was in Vegas. Rabbi Feinstein said, if you're leading the service and you're not having fun, imagine the people who are trying to participate, they're not having fun either. And I know Rabbi Grover, not just fun, but enjoys the act of being a rabbi so much that it's contagious, right? I saw it in his internship with my dad. And we talk all the time because what's best practices out there? What are you doing in Toronto? And it's been a wonderful shidduch, even though we don't see each other physically often. We feel really, really connected as well.
Great. I was hoping for more of an embarrassing story than an ad pitch of how great he is, but because we know that here at Beth Tikvah. But
I'll tell you
don't have
one
to share
funny.
if you don't want.
One funny story. When we lived in Israel, you would go to the shuk, and in the Arab shuk in Jerusalem, you would buy like T-shirts, right? And we would walk to school. We lived in like Emek Rafaim, and we would walk up to Machon Shechter up a very big hill. And one time he bought we bought T-shirts, and it said we were baptized in the Jordan River. Well, on our way, so we were wearing these T-shirts, right? We were baptized in the Jordan River, and we were walking to school, and who we run into? Rabbi Joel Roth. And so we see Rabbi Roth, and he looks at our T-shirts, and we're like, "Hi, Rabbi Roth. How are you doing today?" "Oh, Jared, Aaron, what? Why are you giving yourselves a hug?" "Oh, it's just cold out here. It's just cold out here." So yeah, we learned in that moment that what you wear is important in sending the message to, you never know who you're going to run into the street. And Rabbi Roth is one of the Gedolim, the greats of our generation. And it matters how you present yourself to everybody. that's just one of many things that I could tell.
It's an important lesson for a rabbi, especially. I remember my very first night in Toronto, I went to a Blue Jays game, and I got a Facebook message from one of literally only 5 or 6 congregants that I knew, because I had interviewed, and they were one of the chair of the interview committee, and they were sitting just a section behind me at the game. So in a city of 3 million, I ran into one of 5 people I knew within being there for 20 hours.
And I just want to say, to your community, to the world, though, I know Rabbi Grover has a very high respect of also you, Rabbi Sachs. And, for several years, they were trying to hire an assistant rabbi and always call me, who can I work with? Who will be able to work with and enjoy working with me? And when you came around, it was an obvious recommendation. So it's really neat to see both of you work together and enjoy each other as well.
So I was going to talk about this more in the closing, but absolutely, people should know that you made the shidduch. When I finished school and was looking for jobs, asking where I should go, you said, talk to my friend, Rabbi Grover. And I said, in Toronto? No way. I'm not going to Canada. I'm not leaving the country. I don't even want to leave LA, let alone, I don't want to leave the Valley. But you said, talk to him. I had a 5-minute call with him on the phone, and next thing I knew, I was booking a flight to come out and interview, because it really was something special he was doing here and with the community. So
I'm glad you're learning. I'm glad you're learning. As you told me yesterday, you didn't know it rained in the summer until yesterday. So it's I know it's been a learning experience
until I
for
came
all.
Here. Exactly. The weather was a big learning experience.
Well, I missed that part.
When I came for my interview, it was unseasonably warm in April, and apparently Rabbi Grover kept walking behind me at Kiddush telling people, don't tell him otherwise. And I kept saying, it's so warm here. I thought it'd be colder. And he was standing behind me going, don't correct him. Yeah. Don't correct him. But weather aside, it's really been a tremendous experience here working with Rabbi Grover, being a part of the Beth Tikvah community, and it's a lot thanks to you for putting us together. One of the final questions I wanted to talk about is your father wrote a book, The Broken and the Whole, which actually I have my copy. It's in my work office, because I'm using it for as part of my Tisha B'Av teaching, because it very much talks about, right, how do we deal with difficult situations, with tragedies, with hard moments in life? How can those be used to lift us up still? Could you speak a little bit about that and the story of your brother and the book and
Sure.
and all of that?
Yeah, so I didn't go into it in the beginning when I said why I wanted to become a rabbi, but this piece of the story defines me, both pre-book, post-book, and my life. So in general, I'm one of 5 children. I'm the 4th of 5. And my older brother is 17 months older than me, Eyal. He was a quadriplegic, so completely paralyzed from the neck down for 32 of his 36 years. When he was 4 years old, he was diagnosed with a brain tumor. Most medical professionals in 1986 said, that's it. Please go home and just enjoy the comfort of your family. And my dad said no. In fact, he writes about that in the book, that the Jews are Sinai Temple, as the prophet Zechariah tells us, that we're prisoners, but we're prisoners of hope. And we bind to hope. And my dad had this feeling that if he can get to the right person, then that hope could still be there. And we found the right person, Dr. Fred Epstein. He also passed away a couple of years ago. And he was the type of doctor that operated on the inoperable. After a year and a half in the hospital, my brother came home. He was left a quadriplegic, but fully mentally intact. Graduated kindergarten, elementary school, middle school, had his bar mitzvah, and every step along the way were these moments of hope. We never thought he would do this. We never thought he'd do that. He ended up majoring in fine art. Can you give me 1 second? I'm going to get a painting to show everybody. Give me 1 second. Sorry. There we go. He majored in art. He draws like this. He drew this with his mouth, a paintbrush in his mouth. We actually have a whole art studio or an art gallery that goes around the country. Now it's sort of stuck here until we can travel. And his story, it's called Discovering Joy after heartbreak, but my dad said he should have renamed the book Discovering Joy with Heartbreak. And I think that's a message of today, that with heartbreak, you are still allowed to laugh and find moments of joy. In fact, I would say it's a chiyuv, it's an obligation. And that was the type of environment that I grew up in. Not sadness, but rather inspiration. People would come to my house, my friends, and they would say, oh, that was really normal. I said, I think, are we a weird family or something? And said, no, I didn't expect when you have a special needs brother and fully quadriplegic and on a ventilator, that would be normal. And you made it normal. And to me, that just what it was. And that really defined, not just for me, looking at the world in a different perspective in terms of inclusion with special needs and disabilities, but it also allowed me to be more hopeful at times of difficulty. It allowed me to be more open to hearing other people's stories. It allowed me to understand other people's challenges. And my dad often writes or says that, right, if I have a little cut on my finger and the person next to me has cancer, my thing on my finger, it's not equal to that person's soreness or issues, but I can still be sad as much as they can still be sad. And the same thing, happy as well. I'll just tell you one story, which he writes in the book, but when my sister, who was going to be 13, I have her bat mitzvah, right when Eyal was in the hospital, was not going to be able to be there. He writes that they're walking to shul, and my sister, 12 at the time, says to my dad, Abba, I don't want to have a bat mitzvah. And he thinks to himself, you know, she's right. We're not going to be together, our family. We're not going to, Eyal won't be there. What do we do? But on the other hand, he's thinking, I'm the rabbi. My daughter has to have a bat mitzvah. And he says to her, you can be happy and you can be sad at the same time. At the same time. She has the bat mitzvah. Eyal's in the hospital. Fast forward, she gets married 20-something years later. My grandparents, who really helped raise us during these difficult times, they had passed away. My sister walks down the aisle in Philadelphia, and Eyal wheels down the aisle at that time. And she's bawling, and my dad looks at her and says the same words at her wedding and said the bar mitzvah. You can be happy and you can be sad at the same time. And I think our emotion sometimes in our tradition thinks, right, we can't do this and this at the same time. But look at our Shabbos service, right? You can have a bar mitzvah and you can have Yizkor at the same moment, right? We say Mazel Tov and then we say Kaddish. That is our tradition. You need to actually do that, right? You can fast forward, obviously. My brother passed away at the age of 36. Rosh Hashanah 2017, just almost 4 years ago. I know, almost 3 years ago. And that book was written when he was alive. And my dad says in a video, right, even how broken he is, I can still hold him, I can still touch him, I can still kiss him. And I remember at his unveiling saying, what do we do now that we can't hold him, we can't touch him, we can't kiss him? And sharing his story with so many people throughout so many different lenses and perspectives, it's not just been good for me, but I know it's also been good for so many other people that have walked and continue to walk through the valley of the shadow. But we know the next line of Psalm 23, thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. We have a staff of people around us. It's you. Again, you walked into my home with Rabbi Grover in those moments, and you made us smile. You made us laugh. He told those ridiculous jokes he told because he has those memories of being with us and rejoicing with us. So I think it's the beauty of our tradition, and that's why I do what I do. It's about basketball, it's about music, it's about interfaith, but it's about the hope that I see in everybody, and especially during this difficult time that we're all facing.
Wow, it's an incredible message that is, I want to say it's timely, but really it's all time, because there's always sadness, there's always tragedy, there's always service in the world, but to find that way to hold on to the joy at the same time, right? That's the history of our people.
Mm-hmm, for sure.
I know what a blessing your brother's memory is for your family and for so many others who've heard the story and have shared it. I'm going to put a link to your father's book attached to the video,
Great.
there's also, I believe, a foundation or a website if people want to hear more of your brother's story. Is there a place we can send them?
Yeah, so Eyal's Flowers, EYALS flowers.com, and that's because he painted flowers. And when we asked why he painted flowers, it said, because you have them forever. And we know you don't have them forever. They wilt and they die, right? But what you do have forever are the memories of those roses, of those flowers. And that picture of the roses we, in fact, put on his tombstone, which is beautiful every time I'm able to visit. And also on that tombstone is the words that we say during the Aseret Yemei Tshuva of the 10 days of awe, because that's when he passed. So, Chreinu L'chaim. Not that we should be remembered in the book of life, but that we should basically live a good life with the years that we have.
Wow. I want to thank you for sharing his story with us. The final question I want to ask you is there a piece of Torah that you can share with us that's really significant to you? Although I think you just shared an incredibly personal piece of Torah with us.
So I think the thing that goes with that is from Hallel. This is the day that God made, let us rejoice in it. Every day we say Modeh Ani when we wake up, but find that moment that you can rejoice. Whether it's in a hospital room and you light the Shabbat candles, whether it's in a synagogue, whether you're on Zoom, whatever it is, Zeh Hayom Aseh Adonai, we can rejoice in this day.
That's great. I want to thank you so much, Rabbi Sherman, for joining us. One of the questions I usually ask guests has been, right, is there something you've learned in the rabbinate that you didn't learn in rabbinical school? But rather than ask you, I actually wanted to share one of the lessons I learned from you that I didn't learn in rabbinical school. Or I think it was mentioned, but the importance, how central it was, I didn't really realize until later, which was the building relationships. It's something I saw right away at Shomrei, how you were so close and connected to so many people. And that was, I think, where your success was not that sermons weren't amazing, not that music wasn't amazing, all these other things, but it was those personal one-on-one relationships. I saw that you made, I think, the biggest impact, and I've tried to incorporate that. I remember when I would hang out in your office thinking I was very cool and special at first. I knew the rabbi and got to hang out in his office. Teens would just drop in to say hi. Parents who were dropping their kids off for religious school would drop in and say hi. Everyone had that same kind of personal relationship, which I saw how much that was able to help you and to do. So I want to thank you for sharing that lesson with me of that importance. And I hope my congregation feels that I've worked to build some relationships with them in that same way. But thank you so much for joining us, for being on the program. Thank you to everyone else for tuning in, and we hope you join us again next Wednesday for another episode of Learning with my Rabbi.
If you don't love your neighbor, if you gossip about him, if you never have mercy, if he gets into trouble and you don't try